Install Windows 11 on it. Okay. Windows 11 has been the subject of lots of news and discussions in the last year or so, usually not for good reasons. Among its points of frustration would be its system requirements, as it requires a computer with a compatible CPU and a TPM 2.0 module, among other things. Now that Windows 11 has been out for several years, it's not technically as big of a deal since the pool of compatible hardware has grown significantly. But back when it was new, it was a pretty big deal to not be able to install it on a computer that was older than about 2017, especially given how Windows 10 was handled, with Microsoft seemingly wanting it on as many devices as possible by offering it as a free upgrade to Windows 7 and 8 users. Now the reasons for this, aside from probably money, are a bit complicated, but essentially, for the most part, you can still install and use Windows 11 on an unsupported computer. There's not much stopping you from doing so. On paper, it would function similarly to Windows 10. But what about an old computer, like an eMachine's M6805 from 2004? Well, that's not as straightforward. Before we continue, I have a quick announcement. Have you ever looked at any of this crap and thought, man, how can I support this idiot? Well, now you can. You can now become a channel member to help make these videos possible. Ka-chow. That's it, I'm all out of material. Microsoft hasn't exactly been afraid to cut support for old and obsolete platforms midway through a Windows version's lifecycle. If you remember, when I installed Windows 10 on that Pentium M computer, Microsoft cut support for that machine during the development of the 1803 update, meaning it was officially limited to version 1709. Well, a similar thing happened with Windows 11, although this time it isn't a surprise since technically they never supported these platforms in the first place. The launch version of Windows 11, 21H2, had basically the same compatibility that Windows 10 did by the end of its development. But towards the end of development for the 2024 update, 24H2, they added a requirement for an instruction set that was only present in CPUs from roughly 2010 and onwards. So, on paper, if Windows 11 were to run on this laptop, it would be limited to the 23H2 version, the last version that can run on these old 2000s computers. So, that's what I'm going to try today. But first, a quick reminder of this machine's specs. It has an AMD Athlon 64 3000 plus mobile CPU, paired with an ATI Mobility Radeon 9600 GPU. If you've seen any of my other videos involving this computer, you'd probably know at this point. The RAM of this machine has also been maxed out at 2GB, and I installed a 256GB mSATA to IDE SSD thing. If you remember the Linux Mint video, booting USB drives isn't natively supported in this computer's BIOS, so I have to use Plop Boot Manager via Hiren's boot CD. Not a big deal, but of course it adds a couple extra steps. Now, it didn't look like anything was happening for a while, but the LED on my USB adapter was still blinking, so it was still doing something. But then when it was finally loaded and ready to boot, the computer restarted. Well, that's not good. I feel at this point I should interrupt that by saying I already tried this the night before and got the exact same result. So I knew it probably wasn't going to work. But just to cover my bases and to give myself false hope, I suppose, I tried an older version. I don't actually have a copy of the 21H2 version on hand, but I did have 22H2, but that too just rebooted the computer. So what else could I install? Well, I tried Windows 10 22H2, but not only did that one decide it couldn't have been bothered to display the Windows logo, it also didn't work either. I have an old Windows 7 DVD, I guess. Oh, but that's not very entertaining. Fuck. I guess this video that started out as me trying to install Windows 11 on an old 64-bit laptop has become me installing Windows 7 on an old 64-bit laptop. Well, this wasn't really very exciting. It's Windows 7 and the install process was about what you would expect. Since it was being installed over a DVD, it definitely took its time to install, but the reason I'm installing it this way is, before the revelation in a minute, I thought maybe somehow Windows was failing to boot because of the USB boot situation, and that maybe if it was being installed over a DVD it would work better. As you will see shortly, this was in fact not it at all. Now after it was installed, there weren't too many missing drivers, but crucially, the audio and video controllers had no drivers installed, and there was this PCI communications thing, which is likely the modem. But no big deal, I'll just run SDI to get those missing drivers. Well, that's a problem. I ended up having to run an ancient version of SDI, but whatever, that's fine. It picked up a few things to install, but I was only really interested in the drivers the computer didn't have. The audio and modem drivers successfully installed, but unsurprisingly, the video driver didn't. I could have maybe gotten one working, but I didn't actually want to spend much time on this copy of Windows, since I was only really using it as a base to install something else over it. The next thing I tried was the RTM version of Windows 10 from 2015. I thought maybe there was some instruction set shenanigans introduced in a later version that I didn't know about, and it turns out there was, except it applied to this version too. Apparently, upon looking it up, these instruction sets that it wants here were not present on very early AMD 64 CPUs, like mine, which is why Windows 11 didn't want to boot on this very old processor, because Windows 10 couldn't either. In fact, it's likely it wouldn't have worked on Windows 8.1 either. In terms of Windows options, Windows 7 x64 was the last somewhat desirable one. But wait a minute, if we go back to the Linux Mint video, you would know I was running Windows 10 on it at the beginning. So how does that make any sense? Well, those instruction sets only apply to the processor's 64-bit mode. Technically, those instruction set requirements don't apply for the x86 version of Windows 10. And as luck would have it, I still have the DVD I used for that install, so into the computer it goes. I would have normally just installed the latest version of Windows 10, but I don't have a standalone x86 ISO of the latest Windows 10 version. I only have a combined x86 64 ISO, because I've literally never needed a standalone one, ever. And I didn't think it would be a big deal. I could just update it. I mean, it would take a long time, but it's something I've done before. So that's what I rolled with. Of course, once again, this took its time since it was being installed off of a DVD, but it's what I had, and at this point, I just wanted something to work. And thankfully, this version of Windows 10 installed perfectly fine. Until I came back later to set the computer up and discovered the out-of-box experience had crashed. The computer was still running, but the out-of-box experience was just totally unresponsive. Thankfully, a reboot fixed that, but still an incredibly strange issue to have. This thing sure knew how to take its time. Even with that SSD installed, it was obvious it was bottlenecked pretty badly. The setup even threw up the "it's taking longer than normal" screen. But eventually, finally, the desktop had appeared. The driver situation was identical to how it was in Windows 7, unsurprisingly. There were no audio or video drivers, nor was there a modem driver, but I didn't really care about that one. Since the wireless drivers seemed to work, I thought I'd connect this to Windows Update to see if it could figure out any drivers on its own, and since I needed to start updating this anyway, okay, well, I suppose that's an option too. After the computer rebooted from that, it was really slow all of a sudden. Certain things on the taskbar just wouldn't respond at all. I'm guessing it's just really bogged down from Windows Update, but geez, that's not a good sign. Anyway, speaking of updates, there were a lot, including one for the audio controller. And yeah, you can see how bottlenecked this was getting at times. It took more than 5 minutes for some of the taskbar things that I had tried to open earlier to actually appear. I let it do its thing for a while and came back later to find the computer had crashed again, and this time it was on the recovery screen. Apparently, it was now failing to boot because of the same file as earlier. Looking it up, that's a Realtek AC97 audio driver file. So I guess Windows wasn't happy with its own driver it installed itself. At least I was able to get it to boot in safe mode where I could disable that driver and then it booted back up perfectly fine. With that minor detour now over, it was back to business as usual, getting all these updates out of the way. I was hoping that it would pick up the 22H2 update automatically and skip over all the other versions in between, but it was only able to update to 20H2. Now that's still pretty recent, but it meant there would be more updating afterwards. But once again, no big deal, right? I will say, once it got everything downloaded, it didn't actually take that long to install these updates, so the SSD was doing something. The 20H2 update came and went incredibly easily. Before long, it was at the out-of-box experience again, ready to collect more of my data. It was still getting caught up over the lack of any graphics driver, and interestingly, the desktop wallpaper was gone. But otherwise, the 20H2 update worked about as well as I think it could have. It was definitely harder on the computer. It was using all of this thing's available RAM. As for getting it onto the 22H2 version, that was a whole different story. Windows Update wouldn't give me it, so I had to use the Update Assistant that Microsoft also provides. But again, I didn't really think anything of this though, since I've used it plenty of times in the past. Of course, it was going to take a while since the wireless card in this machine is incredibly old. And it really was taking its time because after nearly half an hour, it had basically made no progress at all. But it seems complaining about it, naturally, made it start working faster. Now the thing with that is 22H2 shouldn't be a big upgrade from 20H2. They're both the exact same base build. It's just that 22H2 has more updates applied to it basically. It shouldn't need to download as much as it would have when going from 1507, the RTM version, to 20H2. So this puzzled me a little bit. And then something interesting happened. The computer seemingly stopped responding. Until I tried moving the mouse, and then it started working again. This happened again about 10 minutes later, and then it happened again, and again, and again. I guess I'm really glad I had Task Manager open. I would have never figured this out otherwise. If you notice the uptime counter, it had hardly made any progress from when I recorded the earlier clip of it at 81%. I didn't know what was causing it to do that, but it was pretty annoying. Fortunately, it seemed after the download was done, it was back to smooth sailing, and little did I know, I was about to have an even bigger problem. Apparently, the Update Assistant could not upgrade this computer from 20H2 to 22H2, and instead, it had downloaded an entire new OS image and it was going to totally reinstall this computer. And that's why the download took so long. I mean, it's not like it was really a problem. This OS had nothing on it other than one driver, but it was incredibly unusual for that to happen. Oh, and guess what? It started doing that lockup thing again when the setup utility prompted for updates. Very good. But again, no big deal, I thought. I mean, after this process was done, everything would be taken care of, and I thought a reinstall might help with some of the issues I had so far. Then, the lockup issue happened again, during the install process. And this is where I really started getting frustrated. I have ADHD. I can't sit here and watch this thing for the entire process. I'm off working on like 5 other things in the background while this was going. The amount of times I got up thinking it was doing stuff only to come back later and find it had locked up again was incredibly annoying. Sometimes it was locking up as soon as I took my hand off the touchpad. It's like having to babysit a child, except in an infuriating and unfulfilling way. At this point, it was like midnight, and I was ready to go to bed, but I was waiting for this thing to finish, and I was constantly having to sit here and move the mouse so that it would keep going. 12 hours had gone by since I initially started trying to update this to 22H2. And finally, it had finished. And after all of that, I found out my user account was totally gone. I thought maybe it would shoot me out to the out-of-box experience again where I could reset up this computer, but nope, it spit me out at the logon screen with no user accounts on it. In all of my years of tinkering with Windows 10, I cannot say I've ever had that happen before. After going to bed, totally not absolutely livid by that point, I put the computer back into recovery mode. Fortunately, that was made easy since this thing didn't have a battery installed. Oh my god, this thing really wants to be as difficult as possible. At least startup settings worked, so I was able to put the computer in safe mode again, where it loaded the administrator account. I noticed it was taking a really long time to load the account though. Naturally, I thought this install was up to its shenanigans again, but then I suspected it was doing the account's first time setup and it just wasn't telling me. And it turns out that was exactly the case, so patience paid off. I was able to get command prompt to load, and from here I was able to add my own user account so that I could actually use the computer. Now, you may notice I did not enable the administrator account. I only added my own account. Keep this in mind. It will come up in a minute. With the account now added, it had to set up everything again. I think after everything that's happened today, leaving everything to them is about the last thing I want to do. I won't bore you with too much more setup related stuff. I mean, it was one last set of updates that I didn't even want to do, but I knew it would try as soon as I connected it online. Now surprisingly, the audio driver issue seemed to have fixed itself, and the only thing the computer was really lacking was a video driver. I'm sure it's no surprise to learn the last Radeon 9600 driver for this laptop is for Windows 7 from 2008. It probably wouldn't have worked anyway, but I was gonna try it just to be sure. But then I ran into an even bigger problem. The user account I created was apparently not an administrator account, and therefore had no permissions to change any settings or install drivers or anything. I didn't even know this was a possibility, but I guess because the administrator account still existed, it technically had an account with permissions. Since I did not enable the administrator account, now I have to try and do that again. I was hoping to just load a command prompt window via the recovery environment, but for whatever reason it just didn't want to work. But I was able to get back into safe mode where it loaded my useless account by default. At this point I thought I was really screwed, but it turns out it simply just didn't load the administrator account by default. Now here's where I made another big mistake. I should have just loaded Explorer, made the changes to my account in the administrator account. Instead, all I did was enable the administrator account, and then I would reboot the computer and do the changes with it not in safe mode. In reality, what happened is the computer decided to set a password on the administrator account after I enabled it. A password that I did not have. Needless to say, at this point, I've had enough. This entire video so far has literally been just trying to install and get something working. I haven't actually used the frickin' thing at all. I could sit here and keep tinkering with it, and if I was really committed, I would probably give it a second attempt by reinstalling everything. But it's now been more than a week of messing with this, and it's clear it's just not working very well. I've been using and experimenting with Windows 10 since before they even shipped an RTM build, and while I've definitely had some pretty stupid stuff happen with it, there's no other way of putting it, I think this is the worst experience I've ever had using it. I don't even think there are enough words in the English dictionary to describe just how comedically poorly everything with this has gone. It's not really surprising that this experience sucks, except in a way it kind of is. I mean, as much as it sucked on that Inspiron laptop, it did at least work in a basic capacity, and the same can be said for when I tried Linux Mint on this computer. The RAM and SSD upgrades do go a long way. When the CPU isn't being totally maxed out, there are brief periods where the computer honestly isn't that slow. Unfortunately, that old Athlon 64 does frequently get maxed out, and the old Wi-Fi card is extremely slow by modern standards, so web browsing is super painful. Plus, there are no graphics drivers here, which just contributes to this thing feeling sluggish at times. But otherwise, everything is technically working. It's just that getting to this point just sucked. I will concede that with the power of hindsight, there were several decisions I made that, well, made this way worse, and I was definitely way too naive. But in my defense, to reiterate, I've never had it be this bad before. There's nothing else to say. I mean, even as I'm writing this video now, I'm completely lost for words at how badly the 22H2 update process ended up being. I mean, imagine if this somehow was my computer, or even if it was just set up in some way using an old version of Windows 10 and the user accounts got wiped out when I tried to update it. I'd be fucking infuriated. Man. Can you believe this video started off with me trying to install Windows 11?